Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. Lovely to see some friendly faces in the crowd. We're coming together to talk about something today that I think we can all recognize is a very important topic, which is the role of youth at the intersection of two very big issues, which is climate resilience and mental health. As a young person myself, I recognize the importance of creating safe spaces where we can bring people together to talk about the smoothie of emotions that comes up when we consider the climate crisis and find ways to channel those emotions together in community into collective action. I'm Sasha, I'm 24, I'm from Canada, and I'm the Research and Curriculum Coordinator for Force of Nature, which is a youth nonprofit that works at this intersection of climate and mental health. We like to say we mobilize mindsets for climate action, but really it's just a fancy way of saying that we talk about our deepest fears and our most far-flung hopes for a better future for all of us. I'm joined by an incredible panel of speakers today. I won't take up too much airtime because I want to hear what they have to say on the topic. But I would love to introduce our panel. So we've got Emma Lawrence, who is the Climate Cares Lead and Mental Health Lead at the Institute of Global Health Innovation. We've got Benjamin Carvajal, who's the RCOY Latin America Coordinator and the founder of Uno Cinco. And then we've got Pablo Morente, who's responsible for climate change and development cooperation for the Spanish Youth Council. So thank you so much for being with us today. It's just such a pleasure to have you. I'd love to start by coming to each of you in turn and just having you tell us a little bit about your work, what brought you to this moment today, and perhaps what perspective you have on climate and mental health. Don't dive too much into it, because I'll come to you with some more specific examples later on, but I'll come to you first, Emma.
Yeah, thanks so much, Sasha. And yeah, thank you for those who braved the very long queues that I hear at the front of the Blue Zone and the early morning time slot to come and join us. So, as Sasha said, I work at the Institute of Global Health Innovation at the Climate Cares Centre, and we're part of Imperial College London. So we've been working on research, policy, intervention design, and education at this intersection of climate and mental health for nearly 5 years now. And really, my path into working in this space was through youth and youth mental health. So I came from a neuroscience background and a mental health research background, and I was working on a... Oh, sorry.
No, sorry.
Oh, you okay?
No.
Okay. And I was working on a youth mental health charity, and I have lived experience of mental health issues myself. And so through that work, I was really interested in what was affecting youth mental health. And we know that there are rising rates of emotional distress. We know that mental health issues in young people are a growing cause for concern around the world. But 5 years ago, it felt like within the mental health spaces, the environment youth were growing up in and the compounding uncertainties they were facing wasn't really part of that discussion. And it really struck me in my friends, in myself, and in my understanding of how the brain works and how we process uncertainty and how that links to anxiety and how challenging that can be, that this seemed like such a neglected area. And so we started talking to people, started looking into the data, and started researching this ourselves. And so now we have data from young people in the US, the UK, India, the Caribbean. And what we've found is also echoed in wider research, looking at this wide variety of emotions, like you described, the smoothie of emotions, Sasha, that young people are experiencing in relation to the climate crisis and the other intersecting challenges that they face at this point in time, and the positive and negative impacts on their life, the agency they feel or not to address those challenges, how that's impacting their future life decisions, and ultimately how these experiences intersect with their mental health. And we worked with young people across the UK to develop a guided journal intervention and a range of activities to start to help young people, led by young people, process those emotional responses, become aware of them, normalize them, be able to validate them, and develop coping strategies, imagine that better future that they're wanting to create, and developing that sense of agency to address that challenge and be part of that solution coming together, as you also mentioned, Sasha. And I've worked with Sasha and other young people around the world on a paper that was led by young people to express in academic fora their hopes and fears for the future and what they want to see in terms of mental health support around this topic, and also climate action. So really happy to speak to all of that, but also just before I move on, want to mention that Sasha and I work together on a global Wellcome funded project called Connecting Climate Minds, which is about building the climate and mental health field globally, and through dialogue creating a shared vision and agenda for research and action going forward. And we've been really pleased and privileged that Sasha and a range of other amazing youth organisations have led work by and for youth, and are developing an agenda for research and action for young people by young people. So yeah, I'd be happy to talk to any of that, and really look forward to hearing what my fellow panelists also have to say. So I'll pass on to you, Pablo.
Thank you. Yes, I think we are in a small debate, so I hope to be closer with our public also. This COP, it's been said that it's the health COP because of the declaration that we have been said on the beginning of the COP. But if you read all the declaration, you can see only one word related with mental health. And I think we have a lot of work to do on that. I came from the Spanish Youth Council, and one of our priorities is mental health, because in my country, in Spain, the first case of death of young people is suicide, even more than cancer of traffic accident. Young people are killing themselves. I think for me it's terrible, and I think as a society we have to fight against that. And there is a evident link between climate change and mental health on that. So we came from a pandemic, we came from different wars this year. So I think everything is linked. That's becoming uncertain for many children and young people, and I think we can go more in deep in the next question, but I think this will be my presentation on that.
Hello everyone, and first of all, thank you Sacha, and thank you for this pavilion, for this invitation. As you say, I am a founder and the president of the NGO 1.5 that is based in Chile, and also coordinator of the Youth Climate Summit, ERCOI Latin America, which this year gathered together more than 400 climate activists of our region in Bogota in person for 4 days. And what I want to say that is because we can move and we can organize ourselves to try to put our demand in just one voice and demonstrate that we can also protest, but we also want to propose and also implement. Actually, that is our sentence. And I'm really happy that we are talking about mental health, because when I started in 2017 in this climate movement, there was almost nobody talking about climate. And now in 2023, we are talking about mental health in the climate issue. And it is quite difficult. I work almost 24/7 on climate stuff. And actually, when I was working in the OECD, when I did my internship, my daily work was try to check the disaster every day around the world. So I was like, okay, what is the level of the mental health if I have to check like the disaster, what is happening around the world? And that is the thing. If we compare with another job, I am a mechanical engineer, and my colleagues, my other friend of my university, they have an amazing work with cars, with all this thermal power plant and stuff. But what I do and what am I like a passionate is like climate. And the thing is like, okay, let's go with energy, but every day that we don't have action, we lose life, we lose like biodiversity, we are losing like cultures, people, and maybe in the future like countries that we cannot like get again. So what is the thing? We have to prepare a mental health resilience in order to, okay, how we can like fight with this, and also understanding that probably it's something that is gonna be, or it's gonna happen with like a bigger magnitude, more frequent, and also with more intensity. So I am completely happy to be part of this panel, and now here in the COP28 we are talking about this.
I just want to give a round to our incredible panel. It's so wonderful to be joined by such passionate and eloquent people. It feels like there was a common thread that came through in this around disconnection. So, you know, like you spoke to, our emotions are disconnected from our work, or we're told that they should be. And our mental health is disconnected from our health, and our health is disconnected from the health of our planet. It's important that we start to kind of cross-pollinate between those areas and see them not as separate, but as one and the same. You've mentioned as well that this research in climate and mental health was in its nascence, not just 5 years ago. I remember starting out in the space and very few people were talking about it. But I think that's also reflective that we weren't asking the right people. And a lot of these decisions have come from research bodies and from policymakers and from decision makers, rather than from young people and from people with lived experience. So Pablo, I wanted to come to you first and ask you, how do you think that the mental health of young people is uniquely affected by climate change? Obviously it affects all of us, but young people in particular.
When we talk about mental health, obviously it's a global problem that affects everyone. But I think it's important to say that it was the young people who started to talk about this in social media and break like, it's like we shouldn't talk about the mental health, but it's like a weird thing, and people is like ashamed to talk about this, and young people start to talk about this with social media and start to put mental health in the public debates. I think that's super important. But when we talk specifically about eco-anxiety, I think that affects my generation, our generation. I think youth and eco-anxiety should be linked, because we suffer from a pandemic, and we are the people who are going to be more time in this planet. So I think for this reason we can create that connections. But the problem is when young people talk about eco-anxiety in social media, it's been ridiculized by many people, and yes, it's like something is not serious. Like when people say I suffer eco-anxiety, it's like, okay, that is a minor damage, and it's not. It's not if we can relate that with people who kill themselves because eco-anxiety or something like that. Depression, anxiety is not a minor damage, and I would like to talk also about solutions, because I think it's super important. We need to talk about a strong health system public. That's super important. And when we talk about adaptations and a budget for adaptation, we should include also mental health and health system on that. That's super important. And we need a specialized like psychologist or doctor who understand that problem, because if not, you can go to a hospital and say, okay, I'm suffering anxiety or depression for that, and they are not going to understand you, and that's super important. So when we are talking about adaptation and budget and money for adaptation, we should include that. Also, it's so very important to adapt our education system. I came from the education background, and I work with children all days, and they talk to me like they are suffering the depression for the situation of the planet and the climate action, because they already know everything. And it's super important to adapt the education system. We cannot talk about mathematics in primary school or high school, and we cannot talk about climate change. Kids need certainty, and kids need hope, and also young people need hope. So we should adapt these two things, education and public health systems.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned something really interesting about when young people come forward to speak about eco-anxiety and how they're often dismissed or stigmatized. And my experience has been that oftentimes people view that eco-anxiety as a negative thing or as something that should be pushed down or ignored. And we know that, in fact, those emotions are powerful for a reason. They're there because we're awake to the problem, and we need to be able to process those in healthy ways, which is helped along by what you said, the education system and stronger health systems. And on that, I'd like to come to you because you've worked extensively with practitioners and with different structures to think about how we can be more supportive and address these concerns in young people. And from your experience working with young people over the years, what are the impacts of climate change on young people's mental health? And in particular, what can we do to address that and validate those feelings?
Yeah, thanks, Sasha. And I want to thank my fellow panelists for raising a lot of points. And I'm like, yes.
Saw you nodding.
Agree. But yeah, just to come back to, what are we talking about here when we talk about the impacts of climate change on mental health and for young people in particular? And I think, the fellow panelists raised it of, even with eco-anxiety, what do we mean? Is this something that people are just saying, oh, I'm a bit eco-anxious and, oh, that's fine? Or is this people who are feeling almost, you mentioned, suicidal because of this level of distress? And so there's a whole range of experiences that people have as a result of the climate crisis on their mental health. When we're talking about the climate crisis, we're talking about rising temperatures, we're talking about extreme weather events, we're talking about the consequences of that on people who can't get access to food, can't get access to water, who are many young people, their parents are maybe losing their jobs, they're having to move. We heard from a young person the other day about how she had to move to a different school because of an extreme weather event and the impact on her, but that she didn't want to raise that with her parents because she knew they were suffering, and so she felt she couldn't burden others with her distress and trauma. And so there are a range of direct experiences that young people are having around the world that are leading to traumas and stresses on developing minds. And we know that 75% of mental health problems start before the age of 24. And so this is a critical window where without the right support, those compounding traumas and stresses, and without a way to validate and enable them to cope and enable them to process those really challenging issues that the climate crisis is precipitating or compounding, that's a big mental health risk. And we know that children and young people are disproportionately directly affected by the climate crisis. Nearly 90% of the physical health burden of the climate crisis is falling on children, and the mental health burden hasn't been fully quantified. But I imagine disproportionately, even directly, this is coming also on children and young people.
I remember you mentioning previously that in the wake of a natural disaster or a climate event, the mental health consequences vastly outstrip in time the physical health consequences in many settings.
Yeah, exactly. So in any form of disaster, not just a climate-related disaster, by some estimates, it's sort of 40 times the number of people might be affected psychologically than physically. So these are really big, widespread effects that can also have a really long tail, like you said. But there are also resilience and people who display resilience, communities that display resilience we can come to. But just to link to this idea of eco-anxiety and what do we mean by that, and I'd love to hear more from my fellow panelists also about their experiences. But I think it's important to note that, from a research perspective and as a researcher, it's something that we're still trying to understand, and that when we say eco-anxiety, it's got anxiety in the title, but it's a whole range of emotional and psychological responses and experiences that are often encompassed in that. And really strong emotions that, as you said, Sasha, can be adaptive and healthy. It comes from a place of really caring for other people and the planet. And so it can be mobilizing, it can lead to action. And so what we're hearing from young people is that they don't want that distress or those emotions to go away because it's a sign that they care and it's adaptive, but also without the right support, it can lead to worse mental health. And so we see in the literature links to poorer mental well-being, higher levels of anxiety and depression. There's not enough studies, but anecdotally, what you mentioned, there are, I know, lived experience stories of people who were at the point of feeling suicidal, having never experienced that in the past once they awakened to the level of the climate crisis, but particularly the betrayal of leaders. And so it is for young people, it's not only that they're facing these challenges now and into the future, but that they know that they're being let down by the people in positions of power, and their future is being mortgaged to pay for record profits in coal, oil and gas today. And so that betrayal and that moral injury, as it's sometimes called, has been termed sort of an adverse childhood experience. And so there's this range of experiences which are, on the one hand, can be healthy, can drive action, but even that action without the right support can lead to burnout as well, because there is this enormous sense of urgency for good reason, but there is a huge weight being put on many young people's shoulders that they shouldn't have to bear, and they shouldn't have to bear particularly alone. And so I'd just like to echo in terms of solutions, a few things. First of all, number one, fundamentally, we all need to be pushing as hard as we can in these spaces, like we are at COP, for a fossil fuel phase out and for more action by leaders. And that is what is going to ultimately mitigate all of these mental health problems, but also the distress that comes with that. And that interaction of knowing, okay, it's not just this experience I'm having, but it's all the future compounding experiences to come. Second, we need to be equipping young people for a future that is going to be very different and rapidly changing. And for careers in climate spaces and for action in climate spaces, that comes with its own unique challenges, as you touched on, Benjamin. And so that means embedding climate and mental health into schools, and that means really integrating that. And that's the problem we see across the board when you talk about connection, is that a lot of these ideas, a lot of these spaces are very siloed. And so climate education, if it exists at all, is very siloed from mental health support and education. So we need to make sure that that exists and that's integrated. And then also that mental health support exists within all of these youth spaces, climate spaces, COP spaces, that we know can be challenging for people as well. And it's really important that there's opportunities for young people's voices to be heard, and that they're part of a meaningful place at the decision-making table. But that comes with its own challenges, and that there is that mental health support embedded there as well. And also just to be learning from the solutions around the world. You work at a youth-led, organisation equipping young people. We have colleagues and friends at Susty Vibes, at the Climate Mental Health Network, at many other groups across the world. You guys are doing amazing work. So youth already have solutions in many cases. It's just that those haven't necessarily been evaluated, identified, scaled up. So there's need to connect those solutions to research and to the people who can scale them up. And finally, just to say that we need to be in education, not only educating our young people and educating teachers and parents to help young people, but the practitioners themselves, because we've heard time and time again of what you mentioned, of people going to medical professionals or their parents or their teacher expressing really high levels of despair and distress, and that being dismissed, or saying, don't worry about it. And I understand that, but it also means that sense of not being validated, not being heard, or also not having a safe space to speak, where they don't want to burden other people who are also suffering if their parents are suffering as well. So it really is that need for safe spaces, and it really is the need to equip the health system and for the community to become part of that health system to support young people. I'll stop there.
Absolutely. I think one thing that you touched on that I think is really important is this idea that it will get better if we turn away from it. And we see that oftentimes with educators, with parents, with, policymakers. They want to protect young people, but the reality is that young people will become awake to what's going on if they're not already. And oftentimes it's more about kind of letting them have those spaces where they can discuss those really difficult emotions. And I want to come to you, Benjamin. You touched a little bit earlier on your own experience in your work of eco-anxiety or of climate-related emotions. And I wanted to ask you if you feel like that psychological resilience, like having those spaces to talk about this, is important to equip us to face a rapidly changing world.
Well, I still remember in the COP25 that it was in Madrid, talking about that we are in the Spanish pavilion. And I remember that was my first COP in my life as a climate activist. And when I was coming back to my house, I was, after 2 weeks of full of information, full of, okay, what is going to happen with the climate and the complete war. And I was on the bus, seeing through the window in the capital of Chile, on Santiago, full of plastic on the street, like full of like meat. And after like the whole information, I said was like, man, how can I like control this? And I really felt almost 2 weeks with no energy. Like I felt completely like overwhelmed, like collapsed about like all this information, and I saw like it was like a problem that I couldn't like manage. So I think that was my first time that I felt this like eco anxiety, like this is a big problem after many information, and I felt like completely like paralyzed about them. And like I think like then in February I was like I felt with the whole energy to act again. We know that the climate is gonna change. It's gonna rise around 1.5 degrees, and all the projections showed us that it's gonna be more than 2 degrees if don't like act with ambitious. So the thing is like we have to know that the climate is gonna change. That's the first thing. That means that we're gonna survive many other like dangers, hazards, many other impacts. So when we talk about climate resilience, it's the capacity to adapt to the different hazards in terms of climate, but in terms of also like how we can respond to that. So when we talk about mental health, climate resilience is like how we can prepare our mental health in order to live in a new climate with more impact, and also considering, talking about the different geopolitical conflict, that the climate crisis probably is going to be the biggest one, but it's not going to be the only one. And probably in the future we are going to see more political conflict, more wars, and that is going to put us in a very like vulnerable situation. So when we talk about, okay, be prepared in terms of climate health, we have to understand that the health system have to be prepared, but not all just in a physical way, also in a mental health. Because we can see in the future most like young people and also people completely paralyzed about all this information, and seeing also how the local community see how their like houses, places has been destroyed for something that they are not responsible for. So we have to be prepared in terms of the health system, have to be prepared, and also do not underestimate the power or the impact of this impact in our mental health, and how can that affect and like just frozen us in terms of like in our life, in our job, and many other stuff. So the thing is like, let's talk more about mental health and health overall in this situation, in a climate, in a world that is going to change completely, and probably in the next 10 years, 5 years, 20 years, it's going to be completely different.
Yeah. You mentioned something really interesting, which is around mental health being a core part of that resilience that we need to face up to a rapidly changing world. And the feeling that you described having after 2 weeks of COP, of just being completely paralyzed. I also wonder if that affects people in positions of power ever who are needing to make these big decisions. I wonder about being at COP here and kind of that emotional paralysis, and then trying to make those big choices when you're in that state. Is there something that you would like to see in spaces like COP around climate and mental health that you think could move the needle on creating safer spaces for that conversation?
Well, first of all, I would like to see action and real like commitment that we confront this climate change. Actually, in my first day that I came here to the COP, I know that this COP was almost 3 times of the last biggest COP that was like COP 27. So I was thinking, well, I would like to wait for like 3 times more commitments.
Yeah.
We are in a complex country that we are gonna see if they are real commitment with the climate action in the last day. If we can really phase out all the fossil fuel, it's a test for them on all the fossil fuel countries, companies, and etc. What I would like to see in these kind of spaces, that more than action, that is like a commitment from the decision makers, is like that we are a community that have the energy, have the idea, have the purpose, have the seed in their stomach, that we can do more than this commitment probably in the Dubai Declaration implementation or whatever, we don't know the name, but see also that there is like another kind of agreement that is happening on the ground, and that is also the COP. Now the COP, it has become not just like in a negotiation space, has become also in a space where all the climate sector can just get together. Many friends in Instagram has asked me if they're necessary that 100,000 people to come in a very specific place from many corners of the world. I'm not sure if 100,000, but it is necessary that the different stakeholders, the civil society, the indigenous community, the academy, the young people, private sector, have to get together in order also to implement and create other agreements more than the climate negotiation. So what I would like to see, that we can get together and try to find our common point more than our differences. Because if we put the focus on our differences, we are gonna just like close the door and say, okay, this is gonna like a disaster, and just that.
I have to say, what you're saying, it makes me feel very emotional, because the idea of people not being able to show up as anything except for their titles to something when we're facing up to humanity's largest problems is a travesty. And there needs to be that space for what you're talking about, which is mind and heart connection, like seeing and recognizing that we're all citizens of an earth that is facing an uncertain future, and that we need to show up as humans and as people, rather than just going directly into problem solving mode and zipping up our suits and getting on with business as usual. So yeah, excuse me, it makes me a little emotional. I wanted to kind of, on that point, pivot us a little bit to talking specifically about youth. And I think what is really incredible about the youth perspective on climate resilience and mental health is that they have been at the forefront of having these really honest and hard, sometimes bleak, but oftentimes more so courageous conversations. And they've been staunch advocates of getting themselves into those spaces and having those conversations with people who have historically excluded them. And those decisions that govern their future need to include them as well. Pablo, I'll come to you first. I want to hear your perspective on how we can more meaningfully engage young people in those decisions governing their future, specifically around their health, their mental health, and the futures of their communities.
Well, I think we already have been recognized as main protagonists on that event. I mean, we cannot understand anymore a COP without youth people, that's for sure. Also, some states start to include youth perspective in their delegations and inside their domestic policies. Not all states, that's for sure. But what I want to talk about is also about the judicial power. I think we have a lot of work to do on that. I'm going to explain that. I want to make a link between mental health and health with climate justice, because climate justice is a global concept and sometimes difficult to link both concepts. But we have to think in all these climate litigations that are happening right now. We have seen a lot of in South America, but also in, for example, Montana State in the United States, like a group of young people has been recognized that they have been vulnerating their human rights to a healthy environment. And one of the most important points of the sentence, of the judicial sentence, was mental health. Actually, the court recognized that they have been vulnerating the mental health. Also, a group of Portuguese, young Portuguese, are right now litigating in the European Court of Human Rights. And the court is asking them, what are your damage? It's like, you don't have any physical damage. And they said, of course, we don't have any physical damage by the moment, but we're suffering a lot of our mental health. And it's not, the court have the tool, or they don't want to have the tool to understand that problem. And in this space, super important that we said clearly that the court, the tribunal, the politician has to understand that, because it's a generation problem. And when we grow up, and when we will become a more adult person, I think everything is going to change. But for the moment, we have to fight on that space. So for me, political space are super important, and for this reason, super important. I will be here and pushing and advocating for mental health be included in the political agenda, but also the judicial agenda is super important.
Yeah, that recognition is essential. Emma, I want to ask you, because in your advocacy and your research that I've been lucky enough to participate in over the past few years, one thing that's really struck me is that you have always led with an emphasis on lived experience. So really making sure that we reevaluate in these spaces where we're defining the metrics of mental health and climate justice, that is spoken in the voices by those most affected. And I wanted to ask you about the importance of centering young people in that conversation, and also the co-creation process with young people of finding solutions that work for them.
Yeah, thanks, Sasha. And it's been an enormous privilege to get to work with Sasha and her colleagues over the last few years at Force of Nature. And it's vital that we are, as researchers, trying to develop the evidence that would enable what Pablo is saying to push action. So if courts need to know what are the mental health impacts of young people, they need evidence on that. So they need researchers to come in behind and say, this is the evidence. And so that is, as a researcher, I'm inherently curious about the world, but I also want to be as impactful as possible on driving change. But that can't happen in the right ways without that being led by young people, because if we're trying to understand how young people are being affected, it doesn't make sense to do it in any other way than have that led by and for young people. And the same with any kind of lived experience. I think we can see historically that numerous damages have been done and continue to be done whenever one group thinks that they know what another group needs, or that they understand and that they're going to go in and intervene without that being led by and for and with those communities. Even with the best intentions, it tends to go very wrong. And so in terms of the work that we've done, we've always tried to make sure that research has an advisory group that's led by young people, and that as much as possible, you speak about co-research, that we can be having members of the research team also be from those communities, or also be young people, and so that they can be part of designing every part of the research from start to finish. And that makes the research so much stronger, because also if you're even recruitment, I don't know the way. I'm out of the youth category these days. I don't know where young people are going to, which platforms are the best to get the word out, how to make the best, most impactful TikTok video to showcase the findings. So we need to be understanding, what recruitment methods, does this question make sense? Is it understandable in the way that I think I'm asking this question? Is that actually the way it's going to be interpreted? What do these results mean? That at every point, you need to make sure that you're checking that and involving those audiences. And that makes the research so much stronger, but also hopefully it helps that direct link back into those youth communities, so that evidence is more useful because it's going back into the spaces where it can be taken up by young people for their advocacy, into those spaces of judicial processes or into the policy spaces to say, hey, we've been part of this and this is what has been found and this is evidence and we can move this forward.
I was going to say, for that Portuguese case, that evidence behind it was really essential in making sure that that evidence is reflective of what those young people are actually experiencing.
Exactly. And the same with the solutions. So we designed a guided journal intervention with young people across the UK that has now also been actually adapted and used in Latin America and actually by a group in Spain as well and in Australia. And we're going to be doing some research next year in Australia and the Philippines to also be co-designing and trialing interventions. But again, a lot of these solutions already exist, so it doesn't make sense for me as a researcher to come along and try and reinvent the wheel, but to be working with the young people on just being helpful in creating the evidence around their innovations and solutions.
Yeah, and I want to ask you two, as young people yourselves who exist in this space, what have you seen has helped young people? What are some of the, not interventions, but some of the coping mechanisms that exist in youth communities?
As one.
So polite.
I mean, it's depend of the age, I think. But 13 and Hope, I think, are the both tools that I want to work with. Because if not, it's like everything done. I'm thinking all day like I should go to the countryside and try to learn how to have a garden, vegetables, tomatoes, and start to live with that, with all the data. At the same time, thinking I should be here, I should be pushing, I should be advocacy, I should be part of the Spanish delegation. And yes, like a balance between local actions and international actions, and for me it's the solution that I found, like personally, like be active in my local town, working with my friends to find local solutions, and also be hearing for advocacy. I think everyone finds their way to manage their mental health. I can say that I suffer mental health as many young people, and I wake up every day with anxiety, and so action for me is the medicine to calm my anxiety that way. So it's the solution that I found.
Yeah.
Well, in my case, I'm gonna talk about my region, that is Latin America, and something beautiful that we saw just 3 months ago, were in this Youth Climate Summit of Latin America that happened in Bogota, was the Regional Conference of Youth. Like how 400 young climatists for 26 countries of the region, not just from Colombia, went to this city to talk about solutions, to talk about how we can protest more, how we can propose more, and also how we can implement more. Because that is like our message. Protest, propose, a proposal, and also the implementation. We need those 3 pillars, otherwise we're going to be in a conflict. So what I have seen in these different spaces is trying to find like the common points and to say, okay, we have many differences, but we have this common point. Let's go for that and let's make advocacy. After this Youth Climate Summit in Bogota, we have a declaration with different best practices that different governments in the region have implemented. Also thinking like in a very strategic way that when a country see, hey, the youth identify that as a best practices and it is not from my country, I have to do it. Because let's say the truth. There is like a kind of like everyone wants to be like the best one and also like the example for everyone. So that is like our strategy. And we identify best practices in 4 pillars. That it was energy transition, finance, biodiversity, and loss and damage. And we identify 4 best practices for each of those one. So what I have seen in terms of like how we can like impact more on do like meaningful like impact in the decision making processes is just create a community, a movement, and say, okay, this is gonna be our just few points because we cannot. I mean, we have also to choose our like fighters because we cannot like cover everything. Because if you try to cover everything, you don't like have an advocacy on all of those ones. So the thing is like try to find like a specific points and go for them. That is the best thing, and also act as a community, not just by yourself, because we have many problems. And in the Latin America, we identify that we have many things that we can show to the world, and also we are doing impact and we are receiving impact.
I think that point on community is the perfect spot to thank all of you for your incredible contributions, and to open it up to the audience to see if anybody has any questions that they would like to ask. Any of our incredible panelists. Yeah.
Are we on? Yeah. Thank you so much for a really interesting discussion. I'm Chloe, I work for the Wellcome Trust, so disclosure that the project that Emma was talking about at the beginning is something that Wellcome funds. You've talked a lot during this about the things that you hope to change, and so I wondered whether you could, I guess, think ahead to COP30 and us all sitting here, and what do you hope it looks like in terms of what we're talking about, what support is available, and what actions being taken to prevent mental health problems and protect young people's mental health. Thanks.
Big question.
Yeah. Okay. Did either of you want to go first? Or?
I can go second.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a great question. It's a big question. I feel I can see why everyone needs some time to mull it over. A few points. One, I think as everyone's echoed before, I think the biggest thing for mental health, in terms of both mitigating these direct impacts, mitigating the distress, but also in terms of creating a world that's better for mental health, is climate action. So I'd hope by COP30 that there is very clear direction to and binding targets to phase out fossil fuels, and that we are moving as a world, and the fossil fuel companies and politicians are moving much more rapidly towards that agenda, and that comes with greening our cities, creating more active transport, creating cleaner air, creating stronger communities, and that mitigation and adaptation agenda builds in mental health and psychosocial support to every part of it. So it becomes the norm for all countries within their national adaptation plans to include mental health within their nationally determined contributions, to include the health system and the mental health system. And so that we're equipping within the policy infrastructures, that we're bringing mental health into all policies, and health into all policies, and climate into all policies. So the health ministers are coming to COP in greater and greater numbers, but also that they're interfacing and integrating. There was a ministerial on health, which is fantastic, but they're all talking to each other. They need to be need all of the environment ministers to be in that room as well, or the climate experts to be in that health ministerial room as well, and vice versa. So we need that integration so that mental health is throughout, and in terms of our adaptation plans in all countries and mitigation plans, so that those costs and benefits of climate impacts on health and mental health, but also the benefits of action are there, but also psychological resilience is seen as that pillar for sustained action. And we've heard so much in the Connecting Climate Minds project that Wellcome funds, that the difference between whether people thrive or really suffer these really poor mental health outcomes, we've heard around the world in dialogue, seems to really be about the level of social support that they have, and whether there are really strong social bonds and opportunities for people to care for each other, and opportunities for people to take collective action and be part of that participatory approach to decision making. So that's something IPCC has also called for, and so I really hope that by COP30 as well, that youth voices have really meaningful seats at the table, and that it is seen that bolstering the psychological resilience of everyone in the climate space is a really important part of equipping people to continue to do their jobs, so that there is funding for organizations like us, but others, to also be supporting people in climate careers, supporting people in climate spaces, integrating mental health into climate education, and making sure that there is that widespread work with communities to equip them with those mental health tools to continue to cope and act. So yeah, I'm sure there's a lot more that I can say, but I'll stop there for now and let everyone else come in.
We'll pass it to Benjamin.
So, replying that question, maybe I would like to summarize in 3 points. First, in advocacy, you mentioned about the COP30, right? So in the COP30, we are going to have the year where all the countries have to renew or increase their ambitions in their NDC, in the National Contribution Determined. That is going to be the moment when we can put the health in those commitments. How we can also include the mental health in the adaptation, in the resilience side of those commitments, in order to have like a sort of idea how we can advance in the mental health inside the health system. So, the advocacy in the NDC in our country to put the mental health in the NDC. Second is create a community. A connected community is a stronger community. And a stronger community is a more resilient community. And resilience is, at the end, a climate resilience, to be prepared for the different impacts. So let's work also with the youth-led organization. Young people are not just like strikers. We are also innovators. We are also entrepreneurs. We are also researchers. Like everyone under 35 years old, at the end, under the UN guidelines, are youth. So I think that many of us are youth, or at least in terms of soul, like a young soul. And the third one is, let's educate more. Let's talk more about mental health. It's not bad to feel bad. Let's like hug that moment. Let's understand that moment and also what is happening that. So summarizing is advocacy for COP30. Let's create a movement in terms of community and educate more in terms of like talk more about that and how to manage that situation. And that is not something bad. Just like in the last point, 2 weeks before this COP, we were working with the youth institution of Chile, and now they have a WhatsApp with like experts in terms of mental health, where like everyone in the country just like have a conversation. If they feel bad, if they have this eco anxiety, they can just go in this WhatsApp and talk with this expert. That is, for example, a good practice where we can go to this platform where the youth people go and say, okay, I have my expert here as a government. I'm gonna go in this platform and try to fix that problem that is the eco-anxiety that many people have. He has underestimated the impact of that.
Is there anything you'd like to add?
Yes, yeah, I will be very quick. I think we should talk in a human rights language. When we talk about mitigation, adaptation, finance, we should talk with a language in human rights. And I hope in COP30 in Brazil, we can have a really link it between both. And I will also have the hope to governments or delegations that make youth washing. They really integrate youth people in their delegations, in the negotiations, observer or party youth people. I think that's super important. But the most important is the connection with the human rights. If we understand that mental health is a human rights problem, we will be in the good way.
Yeah. I just wanted to add one thing that touches on that and something you said, Sasha, which is think one of the really powerful things about having health centered at COP and having mental health centered at COP is something people have been talking about, putting the human face to the climate crisis and starting to see that we are not just negotiating about the levels of fossil fuel pollution and greenhouse gas emissions and temperature degrees, but we're negotiating in terms of number of lives, but also the quality of those lives and in terms of human rights. And that if that starts to be centered and understood, that we are negotiating here about human lives and human well-being and human physical and mental health around the world, and that is really centered, and that's what everyone around the COP and people around the world start to understand and hold decision makers to accountable, is that this is our health. And someone said the other day, another young person at the Youth Pavilion said, we're negotiating about health, but health should be non-negotiable. And that's what's really powerful, to see that, you know, people are negotiating with our lives, and that should be a non-negotiable. And mental health and well-being should be a non-negotiable. So yeah, I think that, to your point, Sasha, if we create spaces for people to start to speak from their hearts, and decision makers, I think it's a really, where people have talked a lot about the structure of COP, what that means, like what are we doing, how do we show up, what is it really like in those negotiating rooms. I think it's really powerful, to your point before, of like, how do we bring more humanity into these spaces? We need data, we need evidence, of course, we need the business cases, but we need that humanity to be centered and to create spaces for us to connect from our hearts as well.
Absolutely, and I'll contribute briefly because I'm the moderator, but I think that it's been very convenient that in the past the issue of climate and climate resilience has been one of data and numbers. And if we were in the position that we are in today because there was a paucity of evidence, like, we would have solved that problem a long time ago. It's a problem of willingness. And I think your point about human rights is absolutely right, because we're not just considering a future where we survive. For some of us, that is the case, but it's also a future where we can thrive that we need to focus on. I'm aware of our time. I wanted to invite maybe one more question that we have time for from the audience.
Oh, hi. I'm Irene. I'm from the Wellcome Trust as well. So sorry we're dominating the question time. But I think, looking at the stage, I see you are all such amazing youth advocates. And I was wondering how you think we can raise up more champions, more youth leaders, I guess, in this space.
Great question.
From my perspective, I think, I came from Spain, and many young people would like to come here, but also you need budget, and you also need empowering that people in the local communities. If that people have no knowledge, or the people have not the access to that knowledge, it will be very difficult to come here and to do advocacy. Even they are already done on their own local communities. I think so.
Benjamin?
Yeah, outside of this really weird world that is the COP, there is thousands of youth champions that are working on the territory, building that climate resilience that we want. So my call to action, it would be, let's go where they are, because there are many movements outside, and let's work with them, because they really, there is a big capacity. Of course that we need have a better knowledge in terms of science, in terms of technical stuff. I completely agree. But there are many young people, 15 years old, 10 years old, 25 years old, that are working outside. And also, why we need everyone here at COP. I think that something that is really nice, it's in COP25, I remember that we were around 15 Latin American young climate activists, and now I cannot we are maybe more than 200, and I cannot recognize all of them. That is good, that is perfect, and I really love that, because this movement has increased in just 4 years, with 2 years of this pandemic and with no COP. So there is many young people outside, and also in this COP that is pushing and also saying like a strong words, because that is like our responsibility. Try to challenge the power, trying to say the truth, or maybe just to say, hey, you are not doing good. You have to do it better, because that is the truth at the end. So that is the thing. We need more people just saying that we have to act more and say that incommodate the truth.
Absolutely. With that, I think that's a perfect point to end on. Your point that actually it's not just about bringing young people into these spaces, it's about going to the spaces where young people already are. As we've mentioned, young people are the custodians of so many of those solutions. So maybe not just giving them a seat at the table, but rather asking why the table is there in the first place, and then flipping the table over and saying, let's start from scratch with the solutions that people already have at their fingertips. What I want to end on is, as we've just illuminated this room right now, we've got a lovely community with us, but this conceptual room of youth, climate, and mental health is packed to the gills. I have not spoken to a single young person who is either working in climate advocacy or otherwise who has not spoken about the importance of mental health and about both the burden on their mental health, but also how their mental health affects their ability to show up for their communities. Young people have unique vulnerability in the world of climate and mental health, but they also have unique resilience, and we need to recognize and uplift and go to and platform that resilience for young people, build communities where people can come together and talk about that and recognize that humanity in one another. So go forth today with the rest of your day and take that little nugget, that seed of humanity with you, and take that into your conversations as we think about how to face up to a rapidly changing world. I'd like us all to give a huge hand to our incredible panel. Thank you guys so much for joining us today.
I can say just a few things. Everyone is more than invited to the COP30 that is going to be in Latin America, and the vibe is going to be completely different. Are we going to start to create that climate resilience that we need?
Thank you. Great.
Great. You'll get to hear from lots of young people about the work we've done all over the world in this space as well. So WHO Pavilion 130, if anyone's interested. Thank you. Yeah, you'll get to hear again from Sasha. Yeah, she'll have more of the floor, not just answering the questions as well. Thank you so much, everyone.